was lost and alone, like Korah, cast far from home. Like Korah, they stole my voice. Like Korah, left without a choice. But unlike Korah, I can speak again. Unlike Korah, I have a friend. In my darkest hour, my hope was renewed, because unlike Korah, I had you. Like Korah, no guardian angels flew. Like Korah, shamed by those I never knew. At no God's command, my own footprints remain in this sand. But unlike Korah, I can speak again. Unlike Korah, I have a friend. In my darkest hour, my hope was renewed, because unlike Korah, I had you. Like Korah, you helped me to see. Like Korah, you lit the path for me. Because of you, I'm not without a home. Because of you, I'll never walk alone.
Sorry, I say remove and it plays it. It's a thing. Hello, I'm ExmoJoe, alias Joe Rawlins. I'm here. Usually we do godless sermons in the morning. It's a weird day. I took my son back after spring break to Utah County, and I felt motivated. Some might have said inspired to go back to St. George as soon as possible. I think it's mainly epinephrine. Norepinephrine. You know, you ever wake up 4:30 in the morning ready to conquer the world? Well, by noon I was exhausted, and I had already posted that. Oh, we'll do Godless sermon at 8 o'clock. In the event, here I am, back in St. George. I made it to American Fork and back again in about 24 hours. And I want to tell you why I couldn't sleep last night. Besides the fact that I was staying at my ex's house, which used to be my house, and it was weird. But I saw some statistics as I was kind of pondering last night the circumstances that I found myself in since my divorce. But we're going to get back to that. I want to show you something first. Let's try sharing this. I'm going to share screen this time. This time we're going to try this. We're going to do it this way. We're going to do things a little differently. It's okay. Don't be afraid. We'll do it together. I want you to take a look at this right here. Okay. So I used to be really big into debating on TikTok. And I used to debate flat earthers quite a lot and conspiracy theorists quite a lot I found it enjoyable. In fact, it got to a place where it was toxic, and even wife, my then wife, was telling me, "Joe, you got to stop doing this. This is too much. You spend too much of your time at this." I said, "I don't spend that much time." She said, "How much time do you spend debating conspiracy theorists on the internet?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, like, oh." And then when I actually thought about it, I realized, oh my gosh, this is kind of actually taking over my life a little bit. I don't plan to go out. I don't do things anymore. I mostly just fight with people on the internet. And I'm like, but you have to understand, baby, these people are dumb. And that there has to be someone who corrects them. And she's like, so you find that you convince these flat earthers that they're wrong. I was like, well, no. But it's not about them, it's about other people, because other people get a lot out of it, and that was true. I'd get a lot of comments about, "Thank you for saying that," and that's really what it was all about for me. It was gratifying, but it was selfish, and I had to stop. So I stopped. For a while, I even uninstalled TikTok from my phone so that I could quit. I'm like, it's like I have a cigarette problem or something. Um, but one of them was this conversation I'll revisit real quick with you. This wasn't the exact device, the exact image that was shared with me on a live where I was arguing about the Apollo 11 moon landing. You really want to piss me off? You can get me going about how you think that Apollo 11 was faked in a Hollywood studio in Burbank, California. Man, don't get me started on this, right? And so the guy who was talking, I was talking to this guy who was defending his position that the moon landing had never happened. His position, I was arguing against it. And I said, okay, show me the information, show me the data. And so it was a conversation about critical thinking, which again, as I always stated, it actually may be a bit of a misnomer, critical thinking. Even though I think it is accurate to describe critical thinking with those two words, the fact that one of those words is thinking, I think makes it actually more difficult for some people to comprehend because it actually stops their process of analyzing what you're saying. Because if you say critical thinking, where the operative word is critical, you must critique. In other words, you must do your best to separate your bias, your point of view, your perspective, and other people's perspective and break it down to what is likely to be the truth. People tend to hear only one word, and the word they hear is thinking. So if you accuse somebody of not doing critical thinking, they tend to think you said that they were stupid. And in a way, I guess sometimes we are saying that somebody is stupid, but generally, when I use the term, I'm a very literal word chooser. I like the words to be selected carefully if they can be. And I say, I wish you would really just hear me when I say, I'm not saying you can't think. I'm saying you need to think critically, meaning that we must, all of us, speak more accurately about where the probabilities are before we say something like this. And the guy says, well, I got the proof for you right here. I said, oh, proof. I don't love that word, but fine, let's have proof. And he showed me an image. It wasn't this one; it was another image of the LEM. But in any event, all pictures of the lunar module I love. You guys know I'm a space geek, and he said to me, the program to develop this. Did you know it cost $4 billion? And I said, is that all? And I say, he's like, just this part of the spaceship. You realize this is only part of the spacecraft. I'm like, yes, I'm aware. Yes, I'm aware. I'm like, I could have sworn it was more than that, actually. I'm like, I don't have the numbers in front of me. But if you say you have the numbers in front of you and it was $4 billion to develop the LEM, I'd say, A, what a steal. And B, what's the point? And he said, well, look at it. Okay. I said, I'm looking at it. I said, "Do you know much about this? The development of the lunar module? It's quite a remarkable thing, actually. The technology that went into this is incredible." Oh, that's red, MB. Yeah. Exactly. It was pretty awesome. I was kind of waiting up for it all, like, for the Artemis 2, landing, and, I was kinda so jacked up and excited about it, I fell asleep because I hadn't slept in a while. I was so excited about the Artemis 2 landing, so I couldn't even watch it live. In any event, but I was looking at this, and I said, "If you know about the LEM, it's actually pretty remarkable." I'm like, "I could point out a few cool features for you if you want." And he said, "No, but look at it. Here's the proof. All you need the proof is right here. Does that look like it cost $4 billion?" And now, granted, the image that I was looking at, it wasn't this one. It was another one from another angle, and it was a black and white. These missions, the Apollo missions, generally they only had like one or two cameras. If they had a camera on board that had color film loaded into it anytime. They usually only had one or two at a time, and either in or outside that had color film loaded into it. And the rest were loaded with black and white film. And I forget a better space geek would know which one is the Halsblad and which one was the Canon, which one whatever. Anyways, but but usually they had only one or two at any point in time that had color film loaded into it. And the one that he was taking a picture, that the picture he was showing me was a black and white one. I said, "Well, first of all, what you don't really see in this picture that you would see if you were looking at one of the ones shot with color film is that the foil on that lunar module you're looking at right there is made of is coated in gold." And he's like, "What?" I'm like, "That's gold. Like that's actually gold. I think it's like 24 karat gold. It's not like." I'm like, "But it's gold." And he's like, $4 billion worth? I'm like, "Well, if you're talking about billions of dollars, you're not just talking about the materials that the thing was made from. You're talking about the research and development materials for sure. And you're paying Northrop Grumman and various other companies. Westinghouse, I think, was involved in making the lunar module. You're talking about some of the most advanced technology in the world at the time being developed by the most advanced engineers, and these were aerospace engineers who, up until recently, were making anything from television sets to and toasters to up to bombers and military equipment. And here they are, coming up with technology and questions that nobody had the answers to, like, can this hold atmosphere in space? What's it like? And most of what they were doing was theoretical. Nobody knew because it'd never been done before. And I said, so yeah, it's going to cost a lot of money to do. And and so we were looking at this, but I said, Just let me ask you this, okay? In your mind, does this feel like a convincing argument that you can look at a picture where you're not even seeing most of the tech in that picture? You're seeing the outside of the thing. The outside of the thing is not where most of the impressive technology is. Most of the technology is in the computing that's inside. It's in how they, made safeguards for protecting the oxygen tanks. It's how they developed the guidance systems and telemetry. It's about, there's so much. He said, "I'll tell you what convinces me about this picture." He says, "Do you know that there was a car in that thing? Do you know that does that look like you could fit a car in there?" And I said, "Well, okay, it was a rover, is what it's called." And to be honest with you, it was little more than a golf cart. In fact, it was a golf cart would have, would be quite a glorified way of talking about it. And he said, "That landed on the moon in this spacecraft." And I said, "Yeah, actually." And he's like, I said, "There's actually a bay there. You couldn't see it from that angle." I said, "It's actually on the opposite side from the image that you're looking at there. There's a bay there where when the whole rover was collapsed down, it would fold with its wheels. It would fold in, and then you would roll it up into. They rolled it up into the actual LEM and tucked it up in there." And he's like, "A whole car." I say, "Okay, again, you're relying on conventional thinking of things that you're everyday familiar with, which I understand, But to call it a whole car is like to say that it's like a Cadillac Seville. It's a golf cart, man. It's like nothing. It's a little tiny thing, but no, it's pretty remarkable technology for the time. This is basically they were making an electric vehicle that could run on the moon. I'm like that was new technology for them. Um, but I said, okay, so this is the thing for me. You think that I but want to believe that the Apollo 11 moon landing happened for some kind of reason, some motivated reasoning. I'm looking at it saying you must believe it didn't happen for some kind of motivated reasoning. On that side, you and I, we're both equally making an assumption about each other, saying this is why the person I'm talking to, we're assuming is dumb or wants to at least has some reason to want to believe or disbelieve it. So tell me, let's talk about that, okay? What is the actual reason why you believe that this landing was faked? And he said, he talked a little bit about geopolitics, and I said, sure. I mean, I can understand that reasoning because even we have recordings of President Kennedy even talking about how the reason why we chose the moon shot, the moon landing, was to beat the Russians at something and beat them at something that we could actually beat them at because they had beaten us at everything else when it came to the space race. They were winning, but we had a better chance at the moon. And even there's this recording that President Kennedy had of an argument that President Kennedy got into with James Webb, the guy for whom the James Webb Space Telescope is named, over whether or not the Apollo program, the moon landing, was the best thing. And President Kennedy was arguing for it, saying definitely this is the best use of our money, and our effort to try and James Webb was actually arguing against it. And he's like, look, we have this technology. James Webb was saying, we have this technology to create this rocket so large it can launch huge things into space. And there are a dozen other priorities than going to the moon that I could tell you about that have far better applications for this technology and that would use would have much more practical uses here on Earth and in our lives. And President Kennedy just directly says it and says, yes, but none of them have the political reasoning behind it. And he just flat out says, it's like, the political reasoning is we got to beat the Soviets. we got so it's fair to say, yeah, you could say we had to beat the Soviets, and if we have to beat the Soviets, well, that means even if we can't land on the moon, we're going to have to fake it. And it wouldn't be the first time that America did something like that, right? We've made propaganda before, right? There's footage of you've seen before of whole towns, wooden towns being wiped out by a huge blast. Well, that was propaganda that the government had made, hoping that it would get leaked, intending for that footage to get leaked to the Japanese during World War II to make it clear to them this, because in Japan, most of the structures in large urban and suburban areas were wooden buildings and wooden homes. And the idea was to intentionally leak to the Japanese that the Americans are thinking about and planning and testing technology to take wooden structures, whole towns of wooden structures, and completely annihilate them just to scare them. It wouldn't be the first time that we did it. And so, okay, I can get as far as saying, would we fake the moon landing just to scare the Soviets? You know what? It wouldn't be beyond us. We've done weirder things than that. But doesn't compensate for all of the people that you would have to have faked all of their work. Not just the astronauts, not even just the astronauts and the engineers and technicians in Houston, not just them and all the guys who worked on Saturn V rocket, not them and all of the Gemini missions, not just them and and the space capsules and all of the moonwalk experiments and all the other experiments we did in orbit. You know, but you would have to have all of these media personalities, all of these television people, you'd have to have all these government people, and all of them would have to be sworn to secrecy. These, this is not just the size of the CIA, it would be bigger because you pretty much have to have everybody in the CIA on it, right? It would have to be the biggest conspiracy in history to fake the moon landing. It's not just, oh, we're going to fake this part right over here. You would have to fake it from beginning to end to really pull it off. And I just don't think our government's capable of that. And I still don't. But in any event, but here's where I've been thinking about that because of the Artemis 2 landing. Okay. Oh, that's interesting, Hyde. I didn't know that. Well, I mean, Russia, I know that they confirmed it. I guess I don't remember China. Anyway, but here's what that had me thinking about recently with the Artemis 2 landing. It may come as a surprise to some. I actually think that the Artemis program is kind of a waste of money. In fact, I'm very much sure that it's a waste of money. We really are getting very little actual practical science from going to the moon again. Now, I don't make a big squawk about it because, frankly, any investment that our government is making into space flight and space exploration, I'm frankly in favor of. For example, on one of my podcast episodes last year, Non-Zero Chance, where we were talking about how the former Trump administration pick was it Duffy? Duffy, yeah, reality TV star that Donald Trump liked, who was the head of NASA, wanted to develop and build, and they're still, to best of my knowledge, they're still planning to do something like this, though it does look like Isaacman is slowly burying it, to put a nuclear reactor on the south pole of the moon. Many people, even people who are into space stuff, don't know this, but know this, and I love to bring up things that average people don't know about the moon. Which the moon is beautiful. It is very, of course, it's an incredible thing. Our moon, but what's really remarkable is how we're discovering how little we know about it. That there are volcanoes on the moon. That there are, and also that there is ice on the moon. And you don't generally think about that. You think of the moon as a dry thing. There are no oceans on the moon, but there's water, we think. Because in the craters on the south pole of the moon, there are craters that get almost no sunlight and even plausibly are deep enough that they get no sunlight at all. And they've been able to confirm with other missions from space agencies like India's space agency, have been able to confirm there does appear to be water in there, and that's ice, that's ancient ice. And if you have water, you have hydrogen. If you have hydrogen, and you can place a nuclear reactor, you can make rocket fuel, including the exactly kind of rocket fuel that Elon Musk wants to use to go to Mars. We get down to it. So they put it as that this was our moonshot. Our moonshot, they were saying, was to build the nuclear reactor on south pole of the moon, so that we could claim that part of the moon, which we have agreements. We have a standing agreement with the world's nations, with all of our neighbors and friends all around the world, that you can't do that. Nobody owns the moon. The moon is for the world. The moon is for all of us, and nobody gets to claim. But if you have a nuclear reactor on the moon, well, then you can claim that for safety reasons, nothing near that nuclear reactor, nobody needs to be going near our equipment on the moon, besides the fact that it's ours and we don't want you damaging it. It also could be dangerous. I obviously am skeptical. I have my own conspiracy theory. My conspiracy theory is they were planning to use it to make rocket fuel. And so it looks like that may not actually happen. But we're spending all this money, and generally for space flights and for space operations, I am for it because as much money and as much time and as much focus as we put into space projects, we create high paying jobs. We create opportunities for people to study STEM, and we create a future where more technologies will be developed that help us to improve our economy as a nation and to improve the standard of living for the whole world. Out of the space program, we got microwaves. Out of the space program, we got Wi Fi. Out of the space program, we got cell phones. Out of the space program, we got microprocessors, including the brilliant processors in these devices. Though the space program accelerated the world's technology in ways that really cannot be quantified. It created a whole new economy. And never was is that more important than it is right now. I'm going to show you another image, and this one is not going to be as pretty. So I'm just warning you ahead of time. I'm going to share this with you. This is a more recent image. So, as I've mentioned before, and as some of you know, after my divorce, I lived in my van for a few days. And several times, people would ask me if I was okay. And the answer is, I'm better than any homeless guy I know. I have a room at my parents' place in St. George waiting for me whenever I need it. And frankly, if I were to text somebody who lives in this house and say, I'm stranded, the van is dead, and I can't get anywhere, they would say, let us, send you money to get to the airport, and here's a plane ticket, come home to St. George. I know that I have people who love me and care about me and have the resources. I'm fortunate enough to have resources so that I'm never truly homeless. So it's hard, even if you are sleeping in your van on the side of the highway, which I did several nights. It's very, while I was on my street preaching tour and frankly loving it, it's hard to feel homeless when you have a roof over your head and a car that you could go and turn on at any point in time and have heat. This was in the winter, well, it's the late fall. And you can, and or if you don't feel safe, I can climb into the front seat of this car without, it'd be difficult. Get into the front seat of the same vehicle without even having to get out, turn on my car, and drive anywhere in the world. Drive anywhere in the world, really. And it's like it's hard to feel homeless when you're living like that. And in addition to that, if that weren't enough for one man's privilege, for a privileged person, I can always I was getting into that van and going cross country, preaching cross country as I was getting to Virginia, where my partner lives, and now where where we're building a structure for me to move to with my middle child, to be there more like for longer periods of time, probably mainly in Virginia, actually, from here forward. Um, I have a partner there who loves me and wouldn't let me go without housing. And I can always, and if I'm not coming here and I'm not going up north to be where my kids are, and it's because I'm going out to Virginia to be with my partner who lives out there. And if that weren't enough, I have a network of people who have talked about, putting me up overnight all over this country. I've got friends in New York. I've got friends in Florida. I've got friends in Tennessee. I've got friends in Texas. I've got friends in Nevada. I've got friends in California who have all talked about putting me up. I even have a friend in Oklahoma. We've talked about my coming out to visit them, all through the Church of Korihor. And so when people would ask me, "Joe, are you okay?" I'd say I'm just about the luckiest homeless guy alive. But while I was traveling cross country and finding places to sleep, I learned what I was calling van life. and New Mexico. Thank you. And I got a chance to meet MB down in New Mexico and have the what was probably the best lunch I think I've ever had on the road. Um, and and got to meet my friends. Um, but while I was traveling across the country, I realized firsthand what people mean when they say people who are van lifers, what they mean when they say the hardest part about living in your vehicle, whether you have a nice one or not, whether you're doing it out of necessity or by choice, the hardest thing about van life is finding a safe place to sleep every night. And your every single night, it's a little anxiety attack you're having constantly of where am I sleeping tonight? Everything else you do is built around this question, because if you run out of gas somewhere where you're sleeping tonight, you may find yourself in a bad situation, a life-threatening situation, if you don't have gas there. So you have to plan on, well, okay, what's my gas situation like in the vehicle, and what's my backup if I use all of my gas to get someplace so that I can sleep, so that I'm safe. Because there's scary things that happen out there. You'll see people in like van life. If you follow like van life content creators, they'll film when they're sleeping out in the desert somewhere, camped out, and all of a sudden, they'll hear some loud grunting sound outside. They think it's some horny teenagers or something, or like harassing them or something, and then the whole van starts shaking, and they figure out that's probably either a moose or a bear or something, like, and that they were in danger for a minute there. And it could be really terrifying. And so it's like all the time, your whole life is a constant anxiety about where am I going to sleep tonight, and is it going to be safe, and am I going to have the energy, the physical and mental clarity and strength, and the fuel, frankly, to get out of there, especially if you're planning to get off road somewhere. And I learned, boy, firsthand how people in this country are living on these little autonomous networks of communicating with each other through pretty primitive means to figure out, if you are near this place, here are the places you can go to sleep. For example, you may have heard in Walmart parking lots, because if you live near a super Walmart, chances are you have seen people with like reflectix, that's that silvery, um, kind of bubble wrappy looking stuff in their windows and stuff, and you see, oh my gosh, that's a person living out of their car. First of all, if they have reflectix in the windows, they're probably doing great compared to most. It's certainly better than sleeping rough. And you may see them sitting out there in the parking lot and think, as many people do when they start van lifing, including me, that, well, basically, if you can get to a Walmart, you can probably park out. You can probably park there overnight. Nobody's going to harass you. Nobody's going to bother you. Walmart just, they want people to park there, because then those people get out and they come inside, and they shop, and then before they go on. So it's in Walmart's interest to make sure people can park safely overnight in their parking lots. Come to find out, there's a website you can go to specifically to track where that is and is not true. That apparently they have people, usually an assistant manager at a Walmart, whose job it is to answer the phone when somebody asks, "Hey, can I ask you about spending the night in your parking lot?" "Oh yeah, hold on, let me have you talk to so and so." And then they have one person, usually, whose job it is to update people who call in to that specific location and answer, what is your policy on people camping in your parking lot? And there are some that, you know, that the some of these assistant managers that are totally 100% for it. Yep, absolutely. Just make sure that you park, you know, near a lamp post, but away from the front of the store, in the back of the parking lot. Or some will say, Yes, but please make sure that you do not park on the east side or of the building or whichever, the this such and such side of the building, at least not against that wall there, because that's where the trucks come in with our morning truck deliveries. So please don't park there, or we will come over and ask you to move. And so things like that. So there's like these whole networks that you learn to become reliant on. I was only out there for a few days on the actual road, getting out to Virginia, and then a few days getting back. And I used these resources and saw it firsthand. I also saw firsthand parked on the side of the road near people who have RVs, like big, nice, fancy RVs, and are clearly that as I would say hi to them just really quickly, it's like, "Hey, how's it going?" "Good. Who are you? What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm just going for a quick hike up here, gonna do some filming." And somebody these people, they were sometimes they were excited to see another human being or a new face, just to have somebody to talk to, and then ask real quickly, "Cool. Hey, can I ask you a quick question?" It was always, new people, somebody new in town, new into this space, wherever it was. The one of the first questions people would ask is, "Have you heard anything about people getting cracked down on? People who are, law enforcement coming around and raiding and stuff?" And say, "No," and I would be like, "I'm just driving through. I wouldn't have information on that. I would love to tell you if I to give you any information if I had it." And other questions were things like, "Are you law enforcement?" "Oh gosh, no, 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 nothing like that." So it's like it was a constant anxiety of living on the edge on a lifestyle that's basically treated as if it is illegal. And when you hear the housing crisis talked about on television, you hear it talked about as if it is a crime to opt out of America's housing economy, to decide, I don't want to pay mortgage, I don't want to pay rent, I'll do anything to not have to pay rent or mortgage. It's ridiculous. It's throwing your money away. People will sell you on, well, not if you buy. If you buy, then it's, investing. It's not throwing your money away. Only renting is throwing your money away. But if you happen to be one of these a person who decides, no, that's not exactly true either. That's just chaining you down to a property you might not want in a couple of years when you need to move to find a place where there are still jobs. And then turns out, you were actually throwing your money away the whole time. So if who is right, who is wrong, the only time will tell. But it's like you're breaking the law. I want to explain this image to you now. You see this image right here. What you're looking at here is from a newspaper article about how Los Angeles is cracking down. Los Angeles and San Jose, California, several cities in California. I think San Jose, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and other cities are cracking down on what are called van lords. This is the American dream of exploitation when it comes to van life, right? That van life is one thing to choose that, for example, that you are going to opt out of the economy and just buy an RV, travel, park wherever you can. And if somebody, if somebody comes and harasses you, well, you just, like I said, just, you have fuel in the if you have fuel in the tank, you can crawl into the front seat and just go someplace else. And if you decide, I could live like that, man, rather than pay rent, the ostentatious rents that they charge now, I'd do that. Yeah, come harass me and tell me to move, and I'll do it. I'll just get in the front seat and go move. If somebody wants to get, you know, confrontational with me, well, then I'll just keep a 12 gauge in the van or something. I've said that for a while. I'm like, look, I don't like, I don't hate guns, but I'm definitely, I'm not averse to getting something to protect myself if I needed to. I want to become convinced that I'd actually need to before I went and made a decision like that. I'm sorry about that, Lisa. Yeah. That's a good point, Lisa. Not only that, but there's kind of a tax on being homeless when you think about it. Not only do you always have to have fuel, you always have to, the vehicle always has to be registered. It always has to be maintained enough that you can pass emissions in states that still have emissions. And you have to be able to get around. It has to actually be functional enough to get around. If you have an RV, if you have or a vehicle that you're living out of that can't go, it's more of a liability than an asset. Because even though, yeah, it keeps you safe, keeps you out of the elements, somebody comes up and tells you to move, you can't. And if you can't, and that person, your life may be in danger at that point, whatever, not only is that vehicle, not only are you likely to have to abandon that vehicle, you have to abandon everything in that vehicle. And that could be your whole life. That could be your work. That could be, you have to live basically ready to walk away from everything you own in the world, effectively, everything you use to get by. You have to be in the mindset of believing, I'm out here living sheltered, but being homeless. And that means thinking in terms of this stuff in kind of anti-materialist philosophy. It's like this stuff is just stuff. I refuse to let it own me. I could walk away from this vehicle. I could walk away from this computer. I could walk away from this job. I could walk away from it and just walk away and save my own life. And as long as the van runs, as long as the vehicle runs, and you have fuel to put into it, that's a whole different game than if the thing doesn't run. And I don't have to tell you guys, you all have had car problems, right? What happens if the motor mounts go? What happens if the if the radiator cracks? What happens if my van, if we think that it might have a rack and pinion problem. And if it does, we got an estimate when we took it into the dealership to get it serviced, that they said it would likely cost around $1,600 to fix it. That van cost $3,000 when we bought it. I said, well, at that point, I'm just walking away. I'm like, at that point, I may just leave it there and say, you know what, it's yours. Walk away from it. That's the kind of the philosophy you have to live in when you're living like that. Now, when I say unsheltered, some people understand that. Even people who work in housing understand the word unsheltered as being a way of saying homeless in a way that is politically correct. And maybe there's something to say for that. That is the way that people use it. But when you talk in terms of like the Department of Housing and Urban Development, like the people whose job it is to work in shelter, that's not the way they tend to use the term unsheltered. Unsheltered and homeless in technical terminology, those are both fine, acceptable words to use. They're not saying unsheltered to be polite. They're saying unsheltered is a kind of homeless. That means people who are living rough, people who are sleeping rough on the streets. Because if you think about it, if there is such a thing as unsheltered homeless, there's such a thing as sheltered homeless, which seems counterintuitive. If you're sheltered, you're not homeless. Well, that's not true. There are people who are sheltered, but are homeless. And we live in a country where it's become such a common problem to have enough security that you can sleep at night knowing where you're going to sleep, having a roof over your head, maybe even having a heater or an air conditioner, maybe even having power, electricity, so that you can, and even having a job. In fact, people who live on the streets in this country who are living in vehicles generally tend to be people who are working, and especially people who are working full time. It's also the majority. I believe I had the statistics pulled up and then I stupidly closed them. It was something like 92% of homeless children are children from households that are living out of their car. And because their parents are working, they don't technically qualify for as many benefits through the welfare system. And so we actually have welfare we actually have welfare, we actually have social services that are actually designed almost to, when you think about it, and if you talk to people who live in these circumstances, they're excited to hear somebody talk about it all the time. I used to talk to a lot of people when I worked at a gas station, to make extra money back in the days when I thought I would actually own a house one day. I started saving up to buy a house here in Utah. Well, let me tell you, after 2 years of trying, I gave up on that idea. So I started saving up to buy a house for the first time in my life, 40 years old, and I started talking to people. I talked to quite a few people who were sleeping rough, quite a few people who were living in their cars. They come into this little heart station in American Fork, and strike up a conversation with them, and they will tell you it's sometimes like our government and like our system and our society punishes people for getting jobs and for working. It's almost like that's a crime to be working but be poor. This is one of those situations. What's been going on, in case you don't know, there's this new phenomenon called van lords. Van lords are not landlords, but they're practically like landlords. And these are people, especially in California and Washington, um, primarily is where I've seen it. I don't know. They say that this something similar is going on pretty much everywhere, but it's definitely happening in coastal cities, especially like New York and Florida. I want to say is the other place that was really common, but especially in California and Washington, the state of Washington, where people will go and buy broken down RVs on like Facebook Marketplace and go and park them in front of their house on the street, and or not even pull them. They'll hire a tow truck or hire somebody to come and tow the RV to their house. They don't have a vehicle that can pull it. And so they'll call and have a broken down RV pulled over in front of their house, $2,000, $3,000 investment. They'll fix it up just barely and then start renting them out for $500 a month, or a little $600 a month, $700 a month. This has been going on, especially since the big COVID in 2020. Trying to be as safe as I can with my words here. Um, Ever since 2020, this has been becoming more and more and more commonplace in our society, to the point now where in California they have people living in in RVs, renting them on the streets for as much as $1,300 or $1,400 a month. And you think about that for a second. These are people who are technically homeless, but they can't qualify for the same benefits as somebody who is sleeping rough on the street because they have jobs. But because they don't live in a house, that means they don't have any of this, or an apartment. They don't have any of the protections of renters. And so when these van lords decide they just don't like your attitude, they don't like your face, or they want to raise the rents and put somebody else in that RV, and they come to you and say, that's it, I've decided you're out. You've got no rights under the law. And so these van lords, a lot of them have been desperately, thank you, Diana. You're the best. You guys are awesome. Um, and yeah, right, right. These people can come in and just kick you out, just put you out on the street. And so, what it must be like, there's a lot of stigma in our country about, well, people who are unsheltered or homeless. They're just lazy. They don't want to work. This is what it's like to live in a country where you can work your ass off and not be able to pay rent. But besides that, for example, and again, I'm sorry I got up this morning and fled Utah County because I had all these statistics pulled up. But in any event, the Department of Housing and Urban Development has a chart, and I can't find it right now off the, just I wish I really wish I hadn't closed it, but where you could select by state, by research as recent as 2024, because the government does everything a year in arrears. You could select a state and see for that state what the minimum salary, what the minimum wage income for the state is, because it's not the same across, states have minimum wages as well as the federal minimum wage. You see that state's minimum wage and how much it pays to work minimum wage there. And then you see the median cost of a one-bedroom apartment. And then it would show, after the government had gone through and checked all the pricing in the area, what the cheapest cost was. And every single one of these 50 states, there was no such thing as being able to work full-time, a full-time job, and hand over your entire paycheck to your landlord and be able to afford a one-bedroom apartment. And once upon a time, that wasn't the case. Not only because income and wealth disparity was so different, but because they used to have a thing called single room occupancy. So you think of, just so we're all on the same page. So you have a one bedroom apartment. What is that, right? Well, it means you have a living room and you have a bedroom, and then you have a bathroom, at least, right? And then you have a kitchen and what have you. It's a one bedroom. And we think of one bedroom apartments as small housing in this country. But what's smaller than a one bedroom apartment? Studio apartments, right? What does that mean? Well, that means that the bedroom and the living room are the same. And then you have a bathroom and you have a kitchen. And probably the kitchen is part of the same living area too. Single room occupancy generally means you might have to share a bathroom with other people on your floor, like having roommates, but you have a room that you can get in and out of that is your own space, almost like a hotel room, and that is your space. And it might have its own bathroom. Or you might have to share. Once upon a time, this was what worker housing was known as. So that there was an establishment, a system in the American housing market that said that if you can't get a good job, if you can't find a good job, you could just take a job that you can get and at least have a place where you have somewhere to live, and you have, where you could have safety, and you can get a shower in the morning. You can, go to the bathroom when you need to. You can live and function as a person who is sheltered, but at a rate that can be afforded by a person who's working minimum wage. And as housing became not just a thing that you buy so that you can have a place to live or so that you can have an extra place to rent out, but as it became a thing that banks buy and in order to invest as assets, suddenly now you have banks that not only buy houses so that they can rent them, they buy houses just to have them. And then so that the value of those homes don't go down, they buy other houses in the area. And most homeowners in that area tend to not really mind so much as long as they're not out shopping for a house themselves, because if the price of those banks' houses go up, well, then the value of your house goes up. And so so everybody wins, right? Yeah, except that meant that it became a high priority for cities and towns, municipalities, local towns, the areas, especially in the suburbs, to make sure that they extend single family housing, which this is where I'm getting to with this little godless sermon. Once upon a time, I bet you didn't expect to go to a godless sermon and hear the godless preacher talk about covenants. Once upon a time in this country, though, you would be hard pressed to convince a Generation Z or younger person that this is true. Once upon a time in this country, and not as long ago as we would like, people used to have to sign covenants in some neighborhoods that said that you swear and attest and can prove that you are white. And not only that you are white so that you could live in this whites only neighborhood, but that you, when you sold that house, would covenanted to only sell it to another family that is also white. And it was a system known as redlining. And the civil rights movement put an end to that officially on paper. And back in those days, a lot of white Christian people in this country were furious that anybody in the government should think that they could come up with a standard, that a legal standard that says that homeowners and home developers and towns and communities can't discriminate against somebody moving into that area and buying homes in that area on the basis of race. And so there was this opposition to the redlining principles, but it had to be done if there was going to be more equality in housing. And suddenly we were having a conversation in this country at a time before I was born. There was a conversation going that says, what is housing not a right? I mean, it's not enumerated in the Constitution as a right. It's not enumerated it's not one of the ones mentioned by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, a document that was never meant to understand or comprehend or encapsulate all of what human rights were, civil rights were. It's not mentioned and listed there, but don't most people assume that housing is a right? If you don't have housing, so much about your life is just not equal, no matter what your race, no matter what your religion, no matter what your sex or your gender or sexuality. There is nobody who isn't put on an unequal footing with their neighbors if you have to worry every single day, am I going to be safe when I go to sleep tonight? And I witnessed that. I saw it. I didn't experience it like other people did, but I saw it and I experienced something of it. There were times when I ran out of gas and money out on the road and knew that if I was going to get out of there, I was going to have to contact somebody. And I would watch the battery on my phone diminish before I went and watched it, before I took the hit in my pride. I'm just going to be blunt with you. Like, okay, this is me. Before I called somebody and said, so this is embarrassing. I'm in a situation. I'm out on the road and I ran out of money. Yes. Do you think you could spot me $40 for a tank of gas? Maybe I can pay you back when I get a paycheck, or, and had friends who came in out of, swooped out of the sky like Superman to say, Joe, are you okay? I'm the luckiest homeless man I know, but yeah, no, I'm fine. I'm out of gas. And then find, somebody Venmo me money. And I think anybody who thinks that there isn't privilege, that you are not privileged in this country, that there isn't male privilege, that there isn't heteronormative privilege, that there isn't white privilege, should try being an arguably white man living on the street with a phone and a computer and a vehicle, because it'll humble you. You'll look around at people and see, my God, I have lived a privileged life every day. I had no idea how lucky I was. And people who think, no, I didn't grow up privileged because I, when I was a kid, like when people, my wife and my partner at the time, a couple of years ago, got into a conversation once about Joe still doesn't think he grew up bougie. And I said, excuse me, I am the proletariat And my wife, she had said to me, "Your father bought you a car when you were 16." I said, "Yeah. Let me tell you about this car." She's like, "I don't wanna hear it." "Your father bought you a car when you turned 16. You grew up bougie." And I was like, okay, stop. Okay. No, but seriously, this Oldsmobile Cutlass Collide. Let me tell you about this Oldsmobile. And then my partner Winters chimes in and says, and you had a swimming pool. Okay, it was Phoenix. That's Phoenix. You can't live in East Valley, Phoenix, and not have a swimming pool. I mean, I knew friends who did, but those friends would have friends who had swimming pools, but okay, it's not bougie to have your own swimming pool. You know, when you have privilege, you don't realize it, generally speaking. And my spiritual journey as an atheist has largely been involved in realizing how naive I have been all my life. And to some extent, I think in this country, most of us live with some element of that privilege. And you'll hear even people who are politically and economically conservative will say that. It's like, okay, you say that you suffer. You do not realize that you live in the top 1% of income earners of people in the world. And yes, that's true. But that doesn't mean that we live with economic security. There's a phrase that was coined by the Urban Institute. This is where we're going to get to my actually talking about the subject, called TECS. TECS. I wish I'd made slides for this for tonight, but in any event, TECS. I'm sorry, TCES, which stands for True Cost of Economic Security. And basically, over the past few years, the Urban Institute has been working on developing exactly what is the minimum standard of living to get by in America, what it actually means to live with security. Because even if you live in a country where you make more money than 99% of the people in the world, if it can't buy you insurance on a car, like was it Lisa earlier who was saying that? Um, that there that even if that even if yeah, okay, yeah, Lisa was saying, so this is a good point. You still have to pay taxes on that vehicle. I had I had a friend, my best friend who passed away in 2020. Um, when I moved to California and got a decent contract working out of back in 29 no 2009, working for a company out in Irvine, California. And my best friend said, "Joe, you got to get a better car than you have." And I said, "Well, okay, I got a decent contract, one contract, but that doesn't mean I can afford the expensive car." And he said, "Take the Jag." And this is my buddy's Jaguar. And I was like, "Oh, I can't afford to buy your Jag, Paul." And he's like, "Listen to me. I'm going to get a Mercedes. And I need this car gone." I have my suspicion that's not actually. It's like, just make me payments when you can, whatever, and we'll come up with a number, but take the Jag. And he gave me his Jaguar. Okay, that in that moment I felt pretty bougie because I had a six-figure job effectively that I'd been headhunted to in California, and moved my wife and my young daughter, who was only 3 years old, I think, at the time, if I remember correctly. Yeah, 3 years old at the time. And we moved out to California, and I had this, not new Jaguar sedan. I love that car. I love that car. Then my contract ended abruptly and suddenly after about 6 months. No, I guess it was 8 months. And my whole life came crashing down when this one client fired me. And I was grateful that that client was over. Molly was grateful that it was over. She's like, honestly, I loved our time in California, except working with these people that were so demanding and so rude, and so they treated us so poorly. I just want to go home to Arizona. So we went back to Arizona, and and in the economic downturn, then I struggled for well over a year to get any video production jobs. And I relied on the generosity of my parents. I relied on the generosity of my in-laws. At one point, Molly and I, thanks to the brilliance of my sister who intervened on our behalf to help us out and get us organized, we got on WIC, we got on food stamps, and we got we got on as much assistance as we could qualify for. And I was out there working my ass off trying to find video production gigs, and Paul was trying to help me, but I couldn't afford most days to even put gas in the car unless I borrowed or got or begged for help from family or from my business partner at the time, Paul. But Paul and I, who were both very good producers, video producers, we had a hell of a time finding work in 2010. And even when I eventually found work, it took a long time to get back up to level to where I could pay all my own bills. Now, I know I've done a lot of whining to you about money problems. For me, I've been very fortunate that since I started working in video production 1995, I've had pretty consistent work. I've been pretty much able to pay all my own bills all my life, and I've been very fortunate when I've had setbacks to either have family or in this instance even to have the government to fall back on, and that these safety nets exist in our system so that people like me who work and are not only willing to work can have something to fall back on. But let me tell you, it is not easy. It is a lot to ask. It is a lot. It takes all of your energy. It takes all of your time. And yes, it may seem petty to say it takes a hit to your pride to be willing to do some things to get some help, but it does. And frankly, there are some privileged people who would rather die. I mean, it can get that desperate. So when people are willing to work, it should bother us that in every state in our union, if you take a minimum wage job, it's not enough to pay even for a one-bedroom apartment. And ever since we've seen the end of redlining and the introduction of the next thing to replace redlining, because I don't know if you've seen this, like they've taken, like, for example, districts in Texas and taken housing maps of Texas and taken all the areas that they had these red lines once upon a time that were whites only parts of Texas, of the cities in Texas. And you take that as a transparency and overlay it on a map of single family zoning. The Venn diagram is a circle. Okay. The redlining area of what used to be whites only was now called single family zoning, meaning that there was confidence in the system that, well, okay, maybe you can't discriminate against somebody for being the wrong color, but you could discriminate against people who are willing to live multiple generations of a family in the same house, or were willing to take buy a house on a property, and then put another structure on the same property where people can move in. And this is racism in America now, as we understand it. In housing, is that the assumption is if you're the kind of person who would take a perfectly good single family home and turn it into a duplex or a quadplex, or rent out the garage, renovate the garage, put a tiny home there, put an RV there. Well, then obviously you're either a racial minority or you are somebody who's willing to house racial minorities, and that's something that the people in that neighborhood don't want, because then, as they say, the phrase that people used to say was, "There goes the neighborhood." And so the unfortunate thing about the reality of our current economy, this TCES, this standard, true cost of economic stability, which is to say, even if you make more money than most people in the world, to have the kind of economic security where you can go to bed every night knowing that you have a place to live tomorrow, knowing that there's going to be electricity so that you can run the AC, knowing that there's gas so you can run the water heater, run the, heater, knowing that there's going to be water that you can turn on any day, any time of day and night, and nobody's going to come banging on your window or your door in the middle of the night and say, "Hey, you got to get out of here, man," or "We're calling the cops." To live in a world where you have a bare minimum standard of the true cost of economic stability. What the Urban Institute found was that as recently as 2024, 49% of Americans live below that line. 49%. Half of our fellow Americans live below the line of economic stability. And that is something we do not see in numbers in the history of this country. Now, part of that, as we said, as I have said, when we talk about the food crisis, part of that is that we don't know. The government, frankly, wasn't tracking this kind of information during the Dust Bowl. But does that mean that it was definitely worse during the Dust Bowl, during the Great Depression, than it is now? Frankly, we don't have a lot of information to go on for that. But since the government started tracking these things, which in all of these cases is a lot more recently than you might think, like in case of the government tracking, as I've talked about many times before, the government tracking how what kills Americans, and including how many Americans die of hunger in a year. It's only been since the 1990s the government's been tracking. So when I say 2018, more people died of hunger or malnutrition in America than any year on record, that's only going back to the 90s. But it's true. And the 90s were far enough back that you can look and say, look, that's 3 decades at least of a food crisis where food deserts are starting to dominate across this country. I've told you guys before, I have a friend who works in nutrition, who works for Nestle. And he and I talk about this sometimes. We don't talk to each other for like 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And then I'll like hit him with a text message out of the middle. "Hey man, how's it going?" "Oh, it's going well. I'm in, Geneva at the moment, blah, 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 blah." Hey, that's nice. "What do you know about food deserts?" And I told him, he's like, "You should really talk to so and so." And then we lose track of it. And he said to me once, while he was here in Provo, and he'd come out to Provo because his grandmother had passed, and she was living in Provo, and he had come out there and to clean out her apartment, and he was just devastated. Obviously, just lost his grandma. He and his grandma were really close. And he said, "Joe, you want to be my spiritual leader tonight?" And I'm like, "Sure, what are we doing?" He's like, "Let's go get drunk." I'm like, "Let's go." It's the kind of godless spirituality I signed up for when I started Church of Korhor. Let's do it. So we went down to really the only bar left in Provo. If you know, ABG's. And we sat at this bar and we drank, man. Nothing as pretty as this. And he said, "I had no idea." He said, "I was cleaning out my Nona." He said, "I was cleaning out Nona's refrigerator. And the top 2 shelves of her refrigerator were Meals on Wheels." And he's like, "I didn't even know that she was taking Meals on Wheels." And I was like, "Well, there are people who live, there's a reason why that program exists." And he's like, "I suddenly felt incredibly grateful that this system exists." He's like, "If she had told me that she doesn't have money for food or doesn't have a way to," I said, "It's not just that, is it? It's not just, she could probably qualify for SNAP if she needed to. But Meals on Wheels is not just about whether or not you can afford food. Meals on Wheels, more importantly, is can you make food for yourself? Can you be self-sustaining for seniors? And he's like, and she really couldn't. He's like, honestly, I don't know how she would have gotten by if she had to only cook for herself. And and I happened to, and I said, but I hate to bring this up and make this about me or my work right now, because, and he's like, please, anything but this. And I said, we started a conversation. You told me that you knew a guy who works in food policy when it comes to food deserts. And he's like, oh yeah. He said, Joe, I work in nutrition. We started working together at Isogenics. You guys know I used to work for a weight loss company called Isogenics. We consider ourselves a food company, and technically we were a food company. And but from that time until now, this guy is an expert, like a guy who speaks and writes papers about food policy, about nutrition. And he said it's the darkest secret in food in the world right now is that in America there is a food desert crisis that nobody's paying attention to. And he said, and if he's like, if people want to make it about Republicans and Democrats, they want to make it about conservatives and liberals, and they want to make it about, this or that, this or that. And the plain reality is, if Americans don't have to think about food deserts, they just don't. And he says, but even the policy, the idea of food deserts is how far you would have to drive to get food. But the food, it's not just that, he says, but it's to get food that you would buy and get food that you would prepare, considering how far you have to drive to get food. If you have to drive to get food when you need food, and you have to drive to get back, that's an investment of energy that, by the way, you're taking away from doing work. You're taking away from raising a family. You're taking away from taking care of your property. And out in the country, especially in red states, traditionally red states, you have these people here where it's not just a question of how far they have to go to get food. It's the time that you have to invest into getting the food, getting enough of it at a certain time of the month when there's food there, and getting that food and getting it home, storing it safely and keeping it safely where you can get to it, and then preparing it. And it's like this full-time job. It becomes this full-time job, not paying for the food. Paying for the food's a whole different thing. Paying rent and food and insurance and healthcare, medicine, taking all of those costs, that's a whole separate economy over here. Then you have to have somebody over here who their whole job is keeping the food moving from the shelves at the store, keeping getting it to the house, and then getting it into and storing it, and then preparing it and spooning it down people's mouths. It's a whole job, and I was thinking about that as I was looking at these statistics from housing and urban development, where it was showing that, for example, here in Utah, the average wage for minimum wage, monthly, the monthly average monthly available income, disposable income. Well, not even disposable, because it's for housing included, is $360 a month. No, not even that. It's like $350 a month. And the lowest cost single or one bedroom apartment that HUD could find out here was $1,200 a month. Now, if you've known people who've lived in Utah in the last 30 years, that may be shocking to you to think that the cheapest one bedroom apartment is $1,200 on it. And then the median cost for a one bedroom apartment was like something like $2,500 a month. And once upon a time, Utah was known for being the cheap place to live. You could buy a house here cheaper than you could pretty much anywhere else. But then all of a sudden, all these tech bros started moving out here to the Silicon Slopes, And now all of a sudden, and there was so much economic boost and so many wealthy people moving from all over the country to come out to Utah, and all of a sudden, to pay rent on on a one bedroom apartment required 4 full-time minimum wage jobs. How do you make that make sense? How are we just going on living? The reality is, it's just like this food desert thing. If Americans don't have to think about it, they don't. And we just have become a society that lives with poverty all around us, and just where we have made it taboo to even mention that you're hungry, to mention that you are housing insecure, that you don't know how long you'll have housing. And certainly, if you don't know how you're going to pay for your rent, and you don't know how you're going to pay for food, certainly it's going to become a challenge for how you're going to pay for medication. And that includes medications people need in order to work. So you have this, what is a vicious cycle, if you know that term, or even if you don't. We have a vicious cycle that says it makes it next to impossible for some people who have mental illness that's been again stigmatized in our society to be able to pull themselves out. And we have a society that believes that, where people talk about that, we reward people for pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. But if you can't function normally, to keep yourself fed, keep yourself dressed and groomed for work, and then be able to go and work an 8-hour shift, let alone 2 8-hour shifts, so you can work 2 of the 4 jobs it takes to pay rent on even just a one-bedroom apartment. If you can't keep it together because your medication's too expensive, how are you supposed to hold down a job? How are you supposed to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, much less have elite people who have never wanted for anything in their damn lives tell you, just go back to school? Fuck you. Go back to school. So you could borrow $100,000 to learn a skill that everybody in the world who's hiring for that skill right now is actively making the people who work in a job that employs that skill feed data into an into an AI model so that they can train their replacement. And it's like, no, but go and borrow 6 figures worth of money to get trained in a job. What job should we get trained in? AI processor repair? How long before they've got an AI robot that can do that for cheaper and faster? And so it's like we have this system where, once again, nobody's paying attention. And if we hadn't lived through 2008, and I don't mean to bring the tone down too much, and I'll try to get us to a different place here soon. So trust me, just stay with me for a minute. You guys remember 2008? Do you remember the first time in your life? Well, it was for me anyway, where I had any reason to know what Bear Stearns was. The first time in my life where people talked about AIG or about why am I not thinking of it? Deposit insurance. Was it FCID? FDIC? For the first time, people had to we're talking about, all these systems are insolvent. They've just been selling ratings for fees this whole time. And you heard this phrase again and again. Everyone's asleep at the wheel. Government, ratings agencies, the regulators, the bureaucrats, the SEC, all asleep at the wheel. As long as the money was flowing, our entire institution that we relied on with the trust that they have people there who this is all they do. Oh man, I'm sorry, Diana. It breaks my heart. I mean, how many people are we surrounded with all the time who lost their homes in 2008? I tell you, there one of my favorite movies. I don't know if you guys ever watched the movie. Oh gosh, names. Um, oh, what is that movie called? The Big Short, based on the book by Michael Lewis. Good book, interesting book. Anyways, one of my favorite movies to watch. Incredible film and a very good book. And more important than I think people realize even now. But I got to a point where I couldn't even watch it anymore. I've seen that movie I don't know how many times. But then as this crisis has gone on, I found I can't watch it anymore because it makes me so angry. How people we came to rely upon trust for an institution that just didn't exist in reality. Because as long as there was money flowing for Wall Street, nobody who's in charge of alerting the public, the media wasn't saying shit, and they knew. Wall Street wasn't saying shit, and they knew. Government wasn't saying shit. Republicans or Democrats, nobody was saying shit about how close we were to the brink of a point where things get really bad. And there's this one line in there where Brad Pitt turns to uh turns to these guys that have made all this money selling oh gosh, what were they called? Bonds. So no, anyways, I guess I've blocked it out. It's been so frustrating. Um, what do I call it? Anyway, securities. And they were selling, and they basically bet against the housing market and made a lot of money. And he turns to them, and they start dancing while they're after did a whole bunch of these trades in Las Vegas, which you know Adam McKay, the director of the film, plainly admits to everybody, he's like, we had to fictionalize some of these scenes. None of this happened this way. They were actually in Colorado when this happened, and blah blah blah. And but he's like, but it's just a convenient way to tell the story. And so they're in Vegas and they're doing these trades, and and they start dancing. And Brad Pitt turns to them and he says, "Don't. What are you doing? Don't dance." And they're like, "Well, we just made a lot of money betting against the housing market, and everybody thought that we couldn't do it." And he says, "Do you know that uh, every so many unemployment, every so much that unemployment goes up, the suicide rate goes up by X amount." I forget the exact line. Did you know that? And they said, "No, no, I didn't know that." Gosh, now you really brought the tenor of the whole thing down, man. We're just excited because we made money. That whole scene never happened in real life. And it turns out the statistic that he quoted, it's not even true. Nobody knows. But Adam McKay put that line in there, and the filmmakers put that line in there just to get people to Google it and then come up with all the rest of the research on what no, nobody knows what that number actually is. Just to put it in your brain that, wait a minute, I guess I always assumed that there were people tracking this kind of thing, that there were people who work in government, people who work in philanthropy, people who work in our institutions, in our system, people who work in media, who we have all these think tanks that make all this money, the billions and billions of dollars every year flowing through. Surely there's somebody out there who knows this kind of information. And the answer is actually no. We have a system where as long as people are making money, they just tend to avoid even thinking about it. And until it becomes a crisis and people start losing their homes and people start losing jobs and people start losing everything they had. And then it comes out that there's a small handful of weirdos in the system usually autistic. In fact, they talk about that in the movie, who have been watching the whole time and screaming Chicken Little, screaming that the sky is falling. There was this article back in 2010 called "The Five Who Saw It Coming," and Michael Berry was one of those people. He's one of the people in the movie that the movie is about. This guy played by Christian Bale, weirdo, real weirdo, who said that they just opened up basic information about the economy and particularly about the housing market, and realized from just basic information that any investor could get their hands on and look through it and see immediately that the government and everybody involved in our housing system were operating on a completely fraudulent basis of pretending that everything was fine. And as long as you could make a product that somebody on Wall Street would sell, and they often in the movie they refer to them even as prostitutes. They'll say like those whores over at the SEC will just go past and will just overlook it. They would take failed mortgages, subprime mortgages, repackage them as new mortgage with other mortgages, and sell new securities, mortgage-backed securities that had already failed, just resell the same thing to the same customers. And as long as somebody didn't look at it and agreed to pay for it, they made money. And at some point, it became so many people were complicit across the whole system that we lived in a functioning system, a functioning housing economy, propped up entirely by fraud on a mass scale. And I am more concerned now about a bubble of that size, of such an enormous magnitude. I'm concerned most people don't even realize how desperate it is. And the more that I work in just in one little way, in my little corner of the world, talking to people, organizing things, and making connections with people in the nonprofit world, is the more that I talk to people who are experts in housing or food, especially, who tell me how frightened they are right now. And then just in a few days of traveling around this country and meeting people, there's a palpable fear in this country. And it's just overlooked. And there's one, and every once in a while you have a think tank where the people, for whatever reason, they're just public servants who really want to know. And the Urban Institute's one of them. And they have this, they put this publication out there in case anybody wants to know. 49% of your fellow Americans can't afford to make ends meet on a regular basis. And it may not be in our awareness now, but it's going to get there. Now, I tell you that because I want to tell you this. This landlord situation is half of the solution to this problem. Even though, as I just described it to you a few minutes ago, even though this is the crisis right now, and cities and municipalities are treating this like a crisis. Remember I said something earlier about single room occupancy basically going the way of the dodo in America? That worker housing as we knew it went away when we decided that the minimum housing that a standard that an American person should live in is that they should have basically a one-bedroom apartment at the very minimum. We have the richest country in the world. There's no reason why anybody should be living on the street. Certainly, there's no reason why anybody should be living in tenement housing. There's no reason why anybody should be living in a place where you have to pay X amount of dollars every month and still have to share a bathroom with strangers or whatever. You should be able to at least afford a one-bedroom apartment. and with absolutely no political motivation or political capital added in with it to say, well, that means either that we have to raise the wage that people get paid, or we need to artificially suppress the cost and control the cost of rents and or mortgages. That's un-American. You can't do that. You can't just decide to raise everybody to force employers and tell them what they can pay in wages. Okay, well then you have to force the landlords down on what they can charge in rents. Well, that's un-American. And it's like, what's un-American about? Well, the market should be deciding it, right? It's capitalism. Okay. But again, I live in a state here where it costs 4 people's full-time salaries, full-time wages to pay for one apartment, for a one-bedroom apartment. So when you tell me that the market is what's driving the costs, and it's the market that's driving the wages, frankly, dude, the fuck are you talking about? We have lived to see the failure of everything that people think Adam Smith meant in The Wealth of Nations. We've been sold all our lives is the economic system of Christ. A guy who said, if you have 2 coats, give one away to your brother who is cold. A guy who supposedly said, when you have done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. A guy who supposedly said, he who is greatest, let him serve. And he who would save his life in this world will lose in the next. And he who will lose his life in this. When did Jesus talk about capitalism? When did Jesus sell us on this idea that the poor should be punished because they're not pulling themselves up by their bootstraps? And so why is it then that we see Christian nationalists selling us all the time on how the greatest crisis in this country is anybody's going to sell you on socialism? Is that they're selling all the kids on socialism? It's right there built into the trans agenda, and with the kids all have to do the beep 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 boop boop machines while they're looking at internet porn and playing their violent video games and listening to their hippity hop music. And we're sold this bill of goods and say it's all socialism. At the end of the day, it's all communism, Marxism, socialism, and those are all the same thing. Okay, this is what I'm saying. Well, I'm looking at this. Do you remember in 2008? I mean, look, a lot of these people that I've been following for a while, I don't know if you guys know about this. You guys remember this? I did an episode a little while ago. Hyde makes a great point. Hyde, I had to have you give a sermon. Hyde, we got to get more people in here. We got good people at the Church of Korihor. You guys remember I made a couple of episodes recently about this kid, Kai Schwimmer. I've actually started texting people who are mutual associates of mine and Kai Schwimmer, saying, I think that I understand that he's not paying attention to this because I've been in his comments and he's even called me out and pointed me out. Hellfire Agency, blah, 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 blah. He's basically this young Christian nationalist, Mormon, who just got this post in College Republicans of America, which I thought was just this small offshoot of, conservative think tank, whatever. But I don't know. I didn't know anything about it until just a couple of days ago. I haven't prepared enough information for a new podcast episode, but I'm likely to do it in the next couple of weeks. I didn't realize how important this young man who is still in his 20s, very early 20s, has become inside this Christian movement, inside this Christian nationalist movement of college Republicans. And he's now their policy director and actively making ads against Republican candidates for office here in Utah that college Republicans of America have decided are not Republican enough. And he's doing all of this. And then he's also going on all these Mormon shows like Latter-day Saints and Ward Radio. And I happened to mention to a couple of mutual associates and say, I'm not trying to make this kid's life harder. But you deserve to know that this young man's politics are poison. And I'm not saying it because I'm running for office or because I'm endorsing any political candidates. I'm not either on either of those points. I'm just saying right now, as a person who used to be a Latter day Saint, who loves Mormons in my life, I'm telling you right now, I have only begun to expose the Christian nationalist agenda inside the Mormon sphere here in Utah and throughout the country. And I'm one of the more vocal critics out there. And I'm telling you, this young man is an excellent prime example of a hidden agenda of Christian nationalism inside of Mormonism that is on an absolutely devastating scale, leaning into political change that they want to see in this country. And they're even turning against Trump right now. They're turning against Donald Trump and against MAGA. And they are creating a whole new movement. You remember how MAGA was one movement that everybody said at the beginning, oh, so it's basically the Tea Party. And you remember the Tea Party, they were loud, but they were harmless. They were even funny for a while there. That MAGA was the Tea Party, but with teeth. MAGA is already gone. It's on its way out. The Epstein files had almost the opposite intended effect on this movement. Now radical people inside the system are turning against Donald Trump and against MAGA Republicans and or independents and going completely separate from partisan politics, and now making a movement that is full on leaning into Christian nationalism as its main campaign point, and they are embedding themselves right now in both the Republican and Democratic parties. And I'm not making that up or trying to be an alarmist. You guys know who Nick Fuentes is. Nick Fuentes, if you don't know, you should look him up. But if you know, you know. Nick Fuentes recently has come out to mobilize his movement of groypers. These are the khakis wearers, the tiki torch carriers. You know who I'm talking about. To mobilize them to start infiltrating the Democratic, to vote for Democrats and start infiltrating the Democrats in the same way that they have in the Republican Party. You're not going to be able to tell friend from foe by D's and R's next to their names. Not that you ever could, but now you're definitely not. And no matter which side of that political line you are on, you're not going to be able to differentiate one from the other unless you are actually actively tracking every decision that's being made and all of the corporate interests. And frankly, nobody can keep track of all of that. But if you're not aware, some of the agenda items that they're looking at right now, that people that are being pushed right now, are to not only prevent anti-gerrymandering laws from going into effect or reversing gerrymandering laws like the one here in Utah, which, by the way, they sent Scott Pressler here to Utah. If you don't know, you can go back and look at some of my other content recently. You remember Scott Pressler is the gay Republican guy who had the big orgy, well done king in Virginia Beach, in the Virginia Beach GOP offices because he was working for the Virginia Republicans with his activism. This guy got $1 million donation from Elon Musk basically to flip the Amish community for Trump in Pennsylvania, to flip Pennsylvania red. That guy got sent. He's like the Republicans' favorite activist for a while, their favorite ballot harvester, in spite of the fact that whenever he emerges inside the GOP to give a speech somewhere, talk somewhere, he winds up getting death threats. He himself says, I go around this country working for MAGA, he was one of the co-founders of Gays for Trump. And he says, and the things people say to me in my Twitter inbox, the things that people send me, he's terrified oftentimes when people find out that he's gay. And this is this poor man's life. And he's like, then the Democrats come after me and say that I'm working against the interests of myself and other gay people. And it's like, oh, okay. You are, but I'm sure it's not comfortable to hear. Well, he got sent out here, paid to work here in Utah, collecting signatures to overturn Prop 4 here in Utah, which is a very red state that does some pretty shockingly blue things from time to time. You know that in this state, in the time since I've been here, my neighbors here in this state voted to decriminalize marijuana. And on such an enormous scale, there's no way that it was only non-Mormons who voted for it, which means that there were Mormons part of the movement. We know them. There's Connor Boyack, is this libertarian, conservative guy who makes the Tuttle Twins books and series for Angel Studios in any event. Actually a fairly interesting guy who's proud to call himself a libertarian. And here in Utah, you know what his day job is? He heads up the Utah's pro-cannabis lobby. this like far-right Mormon guy, sells pseudoscience and bullshit all day long on one side, and on the other side, he's selling politicians in our state on that cannabis is actually part of the solution to the pain management crisis in this country, and that it's the only way. It's a crucial element in curbing the opioid epidemic crisis. And I find myself listening to this guy, Connor Boyack, this guy who I don't agree with if this guy told me that the sky was blue, I'd rush outside to check first, and then I would ask somebody what they saw. And then he starts talking about cannabis policy, and I'm like, shit, you know how to actually make some sense out of something, Connor? It's like, any event. Then you get this guy, Scott Pressler, came out here and started collecting and started sending out young people all over this state, especially in crucial areas like Davis County, to collect signatures to reverse our Prop 4 that was passed by voters here in Utah, narrowly, but did pass, which created this independent commission that prevented gerrymandering of our districts. And when the state legislature went into action and decided to override the voice of the voters on that, they actually ended up taking them to court, and a judge in the court decided, look, the Constitution of the state of Utah says that if the voters decide that this is the law, then the state legislature can't overturn it like that, and reversed our state legislature. Finally, you remember I said a few years ago we voted in this state to decriminalize cannabis, and the weekend that law was supposed to go into effect, that very weekend, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I don't know how much of this has been proved, but everybody just knows it. The Mormon Church basically called the legislature together and told them, you're going to hold a special session and you're going to overturn this decision. And because the church didn't want it to happen, it didn't. And so when it turns out we got an anti-gerrymandering law placed here in Utah, and to where at least one congressional district is at least plausible to go blue, just because the people in that place believe in pro-labor policies. They're blue-collar people. They're people who fight all the time just to make ends meet, those people deserve to have representation in the government. And so this guy, Scott Pressler, was sent specifically to start the petition and to gather enough and to ballast and not do enough ballot harvesting, old fashioned ballot harvesting, to try and get this decision overturned. And we just found out this week, it was announced that they missed their most recent filing deadline, and it turns out they're not going to get the ballot question on the next upcoming ballot, if they get it at all. Last I saw, this was just yesterday, Scott Pressler has gone to Arizona and started working on initiatives down there. Things can actually happen where ordinary people can start making decisions that benefit each other. And all it takes is to decide. And this is why it comes back to Apollo. I know, like, sometimes my parables focus around the space program or science fiction or something, and it may seem tenuous. Okay, maybe, but just go along with me. Just feel me out on this. In 2008, I knew people who ended up having to move into their cars. In 2008, I knew people who moved back in at home with their parents or with their siblings or with exes. Did you? Are you one of those people? Do you know people like that? Do you know people who are doing what Housing and Urban Development, the federal agency, calls doubling up? Doubling up, what does that mean? And they have reports that they file that say most people don't realize how many of your neighbors in America are living doubled up. And doubled up means that people who have two families or who are extended families, two families or more, living in the occupancy area in housing for one family, and just do the best that they can so that they can afford to make ends meet. When we have a Secretary of Housing that recently came out and said, if Americans are concerned about the affordability of food, and this is where it pricks up my ears, because he's talking politics, I'm thinking about people going hungry, and I think about it every day of my life, and constantly. And he says, if you're finding that food is not affordable, you need to stop eating out at restaurants and start cooking at home. Talk about privilege. A Kennedy telling the rest of us, just stop going out and eating at fancy restaurants. Cook your food at home. Why didn't I think of that? Cook the food at home. Bobby boy, I get that you're a Kennedy, but the fuck, dude? I mean, really? At the same time, we have a certain elected politician who may be losing some favor now, who came out and said recently, in just the course of this year, now the Democrats have invented this new word, affordability. Yep. No, never. That was never a thing before. Wow, clever. They already got it in the dictionary. Look at that. Clever, sneaky devils. Invented a new word, affordability. Nobody used to talk about affordability. What the fuck are you talking about, dude? What are you even talking about? We're living in a housing crisis. We're living in a food shortage crisis, and it's accelerating. 2008, it caught us all off. I feel like it caught most of us off guard because we had a confidence in our government, and not just the government, in business, in the banks, and in the ratings agencies. We had this confidence in the institutions that we completely lost. And I don't know if maybe that some of these younger people don't get it, but every person I know over the age of 40 must have this in our brains. Don't you have this in your brain? That if you think you can just trust Wall Street to do the right thing, if you think you can just trust your bank to do the right thing, if you think you can trust the government to do the right thing, you got another thing coming. We live in a day and age where the system is not just asleep at the wheel, it's beyond that. It's downright corrupted from the top to the bottom. And when people start fighting amongst themselves over parties and over labels that didn't where not it doesn't really matter which one's in power, the problem still continues. Remember last week, not some of you were here when I did Godless Sermon 44, which was MAGA Massacre, where I went over again that when you add up the deaths caused by cuts to SNAP from 2017, starting really taking effect in 2018 till now, in 8 years, as many people have died in this country of hunger as died in the initial blast of the atomic bomb in Nagasaki in 1945. By the time, at the current rate, as best as we can tell, because once again, as of last year, the government has started to throw a monkey wrench, has put a monkey wrench into the CDC's reporting on this. I won't tell you why. I don't claim to know why, but I think I know why they don't want them reporting to us what is causing Americans to die on a regular basis. Because well, no, I've said it before, so I might as well just go ahead and say it again. They don't want us to know. We didn't know. We wouldn't have known if it weren't for the pandemic. That they have known, that the government has known, that ever since 2018, every single year, more people in this country have died of hunger and dehydration than any year on record. True, going back to the 90s, but as far as we know, ever. And when you add those numbers together, it's like you dropped an atom bomb in America that killed poor people. And the media won't have any part reporting it. I'm shocked the more that I talk about it and look up facts about it and obsess about it, frankly, that of the few people who are talking about it, I find churches. Usually not churches that you hear about, like the Baptists and evangelicals, though they seem not very concerned about it at all, frankly. The prosperity gospel churches don't seem to be very concerned about it at all. I would say that the Mormon church doesn't seem concerned about it at all, except they do have some programs. They do something at least. It's just frustrating that they happen to be just about the wealthiest and most powerful institution in the world at this point, and could solve the crisis, just choose not to. But then you get, especially Presbyterian churches and Lutheran churches, yeah, they're out there doing the work. And one of the things that they've been doing, again, is basically the virtuous version of this van lording thing. What they've been doing is buying parking lots or having people donate parking spaces for what are known as safe parking initiatives. Now, safe parking initiatives, those terms, safe parking, are usually government projects, state-run government project or municipality-run projects. But increasingly, those are getting shut down as states and municipalities are hurting for money, as all their money's starting to having to stretch further and further for just basic things like supporting healthcare programs and what's left of them, and supporting economic policies and safety nets all over. They're starting to have to shut down these programs to provide people who are living in their cars and living in vehicles with a place where they can park where they know that they are safe for the night. Where the states and municipalities are shutting it down, churches are starting to try and pick it up. Now, in some cases, like I've seen in Colorado, for example, and in Washington State, some of these churches have been doing it the whole time or have been picking it up over time. But now, if churches don't pick it up and start doing it more, there's a very real possibility, I would say a surety, that in the near future, we're going to start seeing a crime wave of people attacking people living in their cars. And having seen firsthand and even to some extent experienced firsthand what it's like to live out of your car, even just to camp out of your car and just worry night to night about whether or not you're going to find a safe place to sleep tonight, even if you have privilege. Just the physical danger of being in a situation where the walls of that vehicle are all that separate you not only from the elements but from other human beings and law enforcement. I can tell you, I am deeply concerned that there's not enough that's going to be done, especially if the government isn't going to have any part of it, which, from the looks of things as they are now, is pretty much guaranteed. Especially because even the states that some people in this country think of as being on quote unquote their side or on the right side of things are shutting down these van lords and preventing people from as an excuse, they're preventing exploitation of people who are having to rent but without any of the rights that the law assures to renters. Sure, okay, great, as long as they're preventing the exploitation of people, great. But if you're not providing an alternative, if you're not giving people rights, if there's not going to be squatters' rights, if there's not going to be a recognition that renting a home on wheels is still renting, if there isn't policy that assures somebody you can have some time if you can't afford to rent even a trailer, a broken down, busted up trailer parked in on somebody's property out in front of their house, if there's not going to be any effort to make sure that those people have some economic stability so that they can make plans, so that they can change so that they can make a change, so that they can figure something else out. If the government's not going to step in to help them, we are going to be in a situation where it's down to neighbors helping neighbors. It's sadly enough exactly what Jesus told people to do, that you should love your neighbor. Lord, who is my neighbor? Your neighbors are around you, and you have these people who believe in this teaching of Jesus. There are some of them out there actually doing the work, but the vast majority of people are actually have twisted Christianity around into being an excuse to not pay attention and to pretend like the crisis isn't happening, and that if you vote for the right person, you're doing your best. And if you give to the right charity and you pay your tithing to the church, or you do this, you do that, well, then you've done your best. You've done the best that you can do. Nobody can ask more of you than that. It all becomes an excuse to give money into the same wealthy institutions that are ignoring the problem. And ironically enough, I think it's going to come down to ordinary people learning how to feel again. And we have been so beat up over these last couple of decades, especially people living through such extreme conditions, that we shut down our ability to feel for other people just because our nervous system reacts to it. to stress and tries to protect itself by pretending that it's not happening to other people and focusing on ourselves. And I'm not saying that, look, I mean, if you don't have the means to give to somebody else, well, then you don't have it. But um, but all around us on a daily basis, we see the emotional and mental health crisis generated by how we as individual people have learned to shut ourselves off for fear that if we allow the world to, like an emotional vampire, tap all of our energy out into caring about everybody else, when when we allow ourselves to say, no, I'm just going to turn it inwards and I'm going to care about me and mine, and I'm just going to, because I frankly I just can't handle it. I just can't handle it right now. If you have to, you have to. But the more that we as a society do it, the more these problems start to accelerate out of control. And that's, I feel, is the real spiritual crisis that frankly churches and gods and scriptures are not going to solve. And because the institutions that are in charge of gatekeeping all of that spiritualism for our society at large are run by wealthy and privileged people who want to ensure that the system doesn't change. I called out this poor guy Kai Schwimmer. And, I really do think he's just a naive kid. But I happened to do a little research about him, what he's been doing this week, and decided not to do any more episodes about him until either he changes his act or he hopefully he changes his act, or he gets enough under his onto his rap sheet that's going to be worth my calling him out. But just give you a little sneak preview. Come to find out that he's not only a friend of this guy Nick Fuentes. They participated in this. There was this documentary they did together called "White Boy Summer: Tour Across America" that you can't find anywhere. Believe me, I tried. I had no idea what this was, and basically, it is this documentary about how there's this underground movement of these groypers, as they are known, these young men who largely don't have girlfriends, in case of some of them, because they are gay and can't live as outwardly gay people, because they're conservatives in a movement that shames each other for not being masculine enough, um shaming everybody around them, participating in transphobic, homophobic, racist rants. And they had this summer, a few months ago, where together with the Proud Boys and local Proud Boys chapters, they started to take over these hashtags to promote white nationalist agenda using the hashtag White Boy Summer, because Tom Hanks' son, of all things, Tom Hanks' son, who makes music, made a song called or something called "White Boy Summer," and it's supposedly, I haven't even listened to it, but supposedly it's about how white boys know that that the world is made up of all different races, and the women of color particularly are beautiful and wonderful, and they something. I didn't listen to it. I barely looked at it before. I'm like, okay, whatever. What are you telling me about here? Because they figured, because apparently because it's Tom Hanks' son that came up with a song about it, that nobody was going, that Apple and all these corporations that sell music and things weren't going to shut down hashtags, because it's Tom Hanks' kid, who's going to shut down what he's doing. So they took it over and started branding everything with White Boy Summer, and started using it to package these ideas. And so, give a preview of some of these ideas they were talking about were that the 19th Amendment is a mistake, that women shouldn't be women shouldn't be allowed to vote, and particularly that they started repackaging it with this idea of family voting, that every family should have one person who is authorized to vote on behalf of the whole household. That America was founded that way, which in a way is true. In fact, it was even more drastic than that. And that that's the way God wants things to be. Or in other words, that women shouldn't vote; they should let their men vote, and the men in their life vote. Uh, some of these other ideas are things like, um, that we do too much, so that there's, beyond just DEI hiring, that there's too much celebration of people for their race, specifically meaning that they want to put an end to, um, Black History Month, and to put an end to the celebration. I can't believe that in this century we're even having this conversation again. They're talking about putting an end to celebrating Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. And it's just all the most racist, sexist things, that policies that we have seen in the last 100 years, that fell out of popularity after World War II. And then again, when people after the Civil Rights Act was passed, we see this movement, this resurgence in white nationalism, come up and up and up and up and up, and it never really goes away. It just goes underground. Like I said before about redlining, they made redlining illegal, and so what happened after that? Then you had single family zoning, because who would object to single family zoning? They repackage it with a different name and sell the same thing over again, and then wait and keep each other animated as much as they can, until there comes a time when where they can just start calling what they're doing by its name, and advising and advertising it to the whole world that they've been here the whole time, and that they've been doing it the whole time. And we're living in a time where, in the near future, while we as a society figure out that there is an active effort, not a neglect, but an active effort right now to exterminate seniors and people of color, indigenous peoples, Black and indigenous people of color, and working poor, including working white people, until we can open our eyes to that the killer is in the house when it comes to this mass extermination, this massacre going on, meant to reduce the number of people who are going to need to rely very soon on social security benefits, on disability benefits, on SNAP, on all the social safety nets. They're actively culling the population of the United States by eliminating people who are poor, with hunger and poverty, and it's all separated along racial and gender identity lines. And they're becoming more and more bold, the Christian nationalists, in calling it exactly that on its face. And by the time that America, on a wide scale, has really woken up to the fact that it's going on, it's going to be too late to stop it. And I'm deeply concerned about it. And again, even I, who say this all the time, we must not allow it to cause us to not feel. I have to remind myself every day that if I just sit here and think about it, if I don't ever think about it, I'm not living true to my principles. But if I only think about it, I'm going to become so shut down. I'm going to turn away. I'm going to turn my heart away. I'm going to turn my attention off of it, my consciousness off of this important thing. I'm going to lose track of what I'm doing, and I'm not going to have the energy to do it. So what I do is, every day I take at least some time to practice overview, which is, guys, I know you guys hear me talk about this. and I still haven't figured out entirely what it is, and I'm still working on the technology so we can improve on it, and I'm getting close on that through with the Corahor app. And some of you know that the overview page on corahor.org isn't exactly working right now. I've mostly figured out how we can implement it on the Corahor app, and it will work better. But this is the point. Every day of my life, at some point, I spend at least just a couple of minutes where I sit and remind myself that to feel how desperate things are for people around me is not to be in danger myself necessarily. That I'm okay right now. And remind myself that I'm going to eat today and I will eat tomorrow. And I will probably eat every day for the rest of my life, even if things go badly for me, which there are some challenges in my life right now. But I know that there are people around me who are able to help me and will if I am desperate, if I'm in a bad situation. And because I have that privilege in life, I am able to stop and think about how desperate life is all around me for so many people who are not in that position. And then in that moment, I take stock of where I am, even visualize where am I right now? What city am I in? How far am I from the nearest Indian reservation? How far am I away from the Diné? I don't know if you know about this, but if you look up the map of the Navajo Nation, they it's enormous, and most of the people that who live within it are people who live as if law enforcement, government, basic things most people in this country take for granted exist for safety and security. They live as if it doesn't even exist because the institutions, because they have basically been abandoned by all governments at all levels and forced to fend for themselves in a society where unemployment is the norm and employment is the exception. And these people are suffering on a huge scale. And I think, how far am I away from those people right now? When I'm out in Virginia, I think about how many people in this area right around me have daily food needs that get neglected and most people don't even think about because they are white. And we tend to think of hunger as being something that only affects minority communities, racial minority communities, and it's not true. In Appalachia, no, it's not true at all. In Appalachia, there are people who skip meals so that they can pay for heating oil, and they're all around. You talk to them, if you really talk to them. I occasionally, while I'm out there in Virginia, I get a chance, though most of my time is on on the property where I spend my most of my time working on the Church of Corahor, doing my day job and working on the property and spending time with my partner and frankly being something close to happy, frankly. Then I go down every once in a while, almost every day when we have to take out the garbage. You can't just take the garbage to the curb. You got to take it down to a dumpster down at the bottom of the hill. And you go down there and I talk to the guys there, or I see people scowling at my partner's car because my partner has a whole bunch of bumper stickers about, yeah, about trans pride and queer pride and when tyranny When government becomes tyranny, resistance becomes necessary, or resistance becomes duty. And boy, you should see the looks we get. Um, and I kind of love it. He likes to irritate people like I do sometimes. And I think if you only knew how concerned I am about whether or not you're going to get medicine this month, that yeah, you hate me because of my politics or because of the color of my skin or for whatever reason. If you could know, person, how concerned I am about whether or not you're going to eat this month, for me to take a moment and just remind myself that I don't need anybody's permission to care about whether or not they're okay. And if that person hates me and is angry at me, flips me off, yells something at me, that doesn't give them the right to turn on my anger and turn off my caring about whether or not they're okay, because I'm concerned about us as a people, and I know that people can change. It took me a long time to come around to that, but I have. And I remind myself that I'm here and that I do care even about people who don't like me. And it has nothing to do with Jesus. Frankly, I think Jesus is toxic. But for where it helps to add this into it, okay, I will add into it that Jesus did say to love your enemies, damn it. How many Christians are actually living by it? Let it be. This week I had one day where for a full 24 hours I failed at this. And it was after I learned that Erica Kirk, I saw this clip. I really got to stop following any content about this person. Erica Kirk was talking to Turning Point USA, talking to her girlies, the women of Turning Point USA, whatever they call that. And she said that how she was bragging about how she met Charlie Kirk. Gosh, only knows why. And she said, I went to Jerusalem with one purpose in mind, she said. I'm like, boy, do not say something tone deaf right now about Jerusalem. Do not. And she said, I had gone to Jerusalem for one point, one purpose, she said, with my mother. And that was to, forgive me for just quoting what I heard this person say, to put as many slips of paper between as many stones. You guys know about the Wailing Wall, she said. That was her quote. That's what she said to these women who laughed and applauded as she said that. And I thought, woman, be fucking careful what you say right now. And she said, for just one purpose. And that one purpose was for God to give her a husband. At the Western Wall? If I have compassion for this woman, it usually involves thinking to myself, she's a liar who's full of shit and she's making that up. I cannot imagine a more tone deaf thing to believe or say or think, let alone say out loud in an effort of promoting your multi-million-dollar organization in the wake of the death of your husband, which you are massively capitalizing on every day of your life. It's like, do you have no conscience at all? And I started posting on Facebook until I had to stop. I had to close the app and not use it anymore. For this long moment, I started to post things about post morality Christians, post morality Christianity, that caused some friends of mine, what few Christian friends I have left, to contact me and say, "Joe, are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm probably taking a little break from Facebook for a while." And yes, yeah, and then yeah, maybe you should. All right, I'm sorry if I said something that hurt your feelings, but maybe if you are a moral Christian, you can just assume I'm not talking about you when I say post morality Christianity. But the reality is that we do live in a day and age where Christianity is used to promote white nationalism and Christian nationalism. And I am very much concerned that we will not be able to stop it with politics. We will not be able to stop it with votes if we even ever have an election again, which I'm becoming increasingly concerned is what that I know the answer to that question, or if it even matters in a world with the duopoly of power that we have. It's going to come down to individual people taking care of individual people. And that's when it impresses upon me how important it is that I don't let anything stop me from feeling. Because if I can let something like Erica Kirk saying some stupid thing about Jerusalem right now, or I can allow finding out that Tim Ballard's work is apparently in some way connected and or funded through APAC, mm, not, uh, not going to stop feeling for them and for the people who are affected by these decisions. And that's when I know we really are living through more of a spiritual crisis than people know. When people think, when you say that by spiritual crisis, they think you mean that we need to turn back to God. Mm-mm, mm-mm. I want other people to have the freedom to celebrate and worship their God in any way that they want, in any way that they can, but in ways that don't hurt other people. Yeah, thanks, man. B. I do. Um, in ways that don't hurt other people, but I am not going to allow institutions of any kind to prevent me from helping those people that are overlooked by a system that prefers white, heteronormative, wealthy people who are Christian. If and that is who these people, and especially an alarming number of young people, have are stating out loud they are only worried about, they are only thinking about, they are only concerned about, and that they would rid their worlds of anybody else. And then when challenged to say, what exactly does that mean? What do you mean by that? It's getting more and more bold how they answer. And then I think, okay, that I'm concerned is good. That I can feel it and not allow my nervous system to become so overwhelmed that I just turn inward and just become neurotic, blame myself. So it doesn't just become, and I don't do shit about it. I think the next thought is, what am I going to do about it? And some things are perhaps very small, but those small things are things I can do every day. And one of them is to talk to people. It may seem, again, very small, but I've been shocked at how impactful it can be to look at somebody and ask, "Can I ask you something? I noticed that you walk to work every day. Do you not have a car?" To ask somebody, "I hope you don't mind my asking, but I haven't seen you. You used to always come to this restaurant with your husband, and you haven't the last couple of weeks that I've seen you. Is everything okay?" To reach out to somebody who's a Facebook friend. Occasionally, I'll do this. I'll say, "I'm gonna go and just start a conversation with somebody that I'm like, we're Facebook friends, and I don't even know who this person is." And just strike up a conversation, say, "This is gonna sound weird, but how do I know you?" "Oh, yeah. I just realized you I don't know anything about you. Okay. Do you mind if I ask you a couple questions just to get to know you?" And how it changes somebody else's day, and how that person feeling like you care about them because you do suddenly leads to a reciprocal question, a basic human decency question that says, "What about you, Joe? What are you doing?" Well, I'm doing a few things, but mainly I'm working with the Church of Horror. I don't know if you know about my little Godless church. And suddenly, people who don't believe like I do and don't have any reason to be drawn to Horrorism, are not atheists or agnostics, suddenly care very deeply about something I care about. And suddenly, even just showing a little concern, a little bit of a feeling heart, a little bit of a warm beating heart can change the opportunities that we have to make a difference. And I think to myself, if I had land somewhere in this country near a highway, I would figure out a way to make it plausible that people who are living in their car, and especially who are on the road between states and between cities, as states and cities are starting to crack down with laws to prevent you from living out of your car. And these people are going to have to take to the road and move out into the desert. And anybody out here in Utah, you hear, people who work in the housing, in housing will tell you that is when it starts to get concerned. When you find bodies in cars, it's when people have to go out into the desert, and the people have to take their vehicle and go out into federal land or out onto state land that isn't being actively patrolled. That's where we find people, because you get out there and you run out of fuel, or you run out of water, or you run out of food, you run out of electricity, your devices stop working, your medicine runs out, and you skip for a couple of meals, skip a couple of doses, and next thing we know, that's where we find you in the car. In the cold months, that's when they find people frozen out there. In the summer months, dehydrated. But the most progressive cities in Utah, Salt Lake City. I don't know if you know this, but Salt Lake City is probably the most progressive city in the state, shockingly. And yet they send the police out to tear up the tents to do homeless abatement, and tear up the tents of the people who that's their only shelter they have left in the world. In a city where the Mormon church is investing billions of dollars into renovating their old six-spired, granite building, so that their angel Moroni doesn't drop his damn trumpet again. There are people sleeping on the streets, and the Democratic mayor, and Democrats run dominated city council sends police out to tear off the only shelter these people have in the snow and in the cold. And the police take this stuff, they take it up into the mountain, they take it out to the dump, and they'll set it on fire. We live in a moral crisis, man. It's a moral emergency we're living in. And I think to myself, well, I don't have land that I could make into safe parking. And the Church of Corahor isn't likely anytime soon to raise the kind of funds to buy that kind of land. Okay, well, that's thinking about what I can't do yet. What can I do? I could go and talk to somebody who does have those resources or might know somebody who does. I was doing this chasing down who Tim Ballard's contacts were this week in this. If you guys saw the episode we did on Friday, it was pretty wild. And one of them was this a man I think is ex-Mormon. I don't know. They're not public. He doesn't seem to be public about his religion, but he has a lot of Mormon associates from family. And I was thinking about, is this guy Exmo or is he Mormon? And I said I saw that I had a couple mutual friends with him, but he was in this network of people who were supporting Tim Ballard and happened to have this tangential connections possibly to APAC. I was trying to figure out, is this how Tim Ballard, is financing his work in Israel? Is that he actually has contacts in the Israel lobby, which would make sense. Then he would have the money. And maybe that's how it all comes together. I'm more convinced than ever that's not that simple, but I found this person and I happened to mention to somebody, hey, do you happen to know this person? I know is wealthy. I don't know if they're Mormon or not. I don't know anything else about them. I'm just trying to find leads for my podcast. And the guy said, well, yeah, we sit on a board of directors together. You what? You sit on a board of directors? Yeah, a couple of them. Really? Friend of mine. I had no idea. I'm like, what kind of are you involved in charity work too? Well, yeah, I do this and this. And then all of a sudden this person who's a Facebook friend of mine is involved in philanthropy, and I get a chance to talk to them and I say, I happen to have started this church for godless people, and boom, 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 boom. All of a sudden, now I have somebody who is connected into the same fundraising world that Tim Ballard's connected into, who's now in a position to answer when somebody says, if the church isn't doing anything to help these people, who is doing something? Now this person who's connected into the establishments of power here in Utah, whether or not it's because they have money or just because they have connections, can say, it's funny, I met a guy. Sometimes it's as simple as that, but we miss those opportunities when we become closed down. I'm gonna wrap this up with this. The reason why I chose this, that we choose to do it because it is hard, is I often think since this whole Artemis 2 mission, which again, I think kind of was a waste of money, but I'm not going to harp on about it because frankly, anything we are doing to invest in space is creating opportunities that otherwise we're going to miss out on as our whole economy turns to automation. I often think back to President Kennedy, ironically enough, and how he motivated all of us. I motivated an entire nation 20 years before I was born and said, we choose to go to the moon and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And just a few weeks after he made that speech that changed the course of the world, I am convinced. I am convinced. Now I'm a space geek, and I am convinced that the Apollo space program changed the world. I know too much about it to be convinced otherwise. And this man standing up in front of his countrymen and saying, "We choose to do it, not because it is easy, but because it is hard." And compared it to climbing Mount Everest and that old, why climb Mount Everest? Oh, because it was there. Blah, blah, blah. And I thought, but I think about it and I think whether or not, President Kennedy just a few weeks after giving that speech had people at NASA on the phone, had people in Congress on the phone bitching about how much it costs. And then it became his thing to double down as often as he could and make sure that he understood enough about the space race to be able to convince himself to go out there every day and sell people. I mean, like every day, and sell people on that this Apollo space program is real and it's important because Congress was ready to bail on him from the moment he said it. They were willing to bail on him, and he had to sell it and sell it and sell it and sell it. We're going to the moon. We're going to send a man to the moon and return him to the earth. Oh, well, we could send a space probe. Even James Webb tried to talk him out of sending a manned mission to the moon. And so, of course, I've been thinking about that a lot now that this whole Artemis 2 thing. What's the point? Well, the point was to send human beings to the moon again. Why human beings? So much more practical and or useful to send a rover, to send a probe, to send a telescope, send up more telescopes. Dear God, the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope is sitting in a warehouse right now, and it pisses me off every day. We gotta get Roman up into space, man. We can't let them cancel it. Anyway, there's so many more things we could be doing, useful things. But when they say, even people who disagree with me politically on things, and say it's about putting human beings, it's about the fact that America sent human beings to the moon once, and we're going to show that America is the ones who are going to do it again, even if it's Canadians we have to send to do it. And I shut up. Okay, works for me. I mean, honestly, anything we can do is a good thing here. But it just reminds me of President Kennedy again, how he would stress because he wanted to beat the Soviets. That was it. That was pure politics for him. But in selling it, he actually struck on the truth. There's some things that are worth doing in life that if we don't choose every day to put the money into it, or to put the time into it, or to care about it, and to make other people care about it, it slips away and nobody does anything. We fall asleep at the wheel. And then the sheer force of this unconscious decision of this unconscious indecision to choose to do nothing and to feel nothing but just make money. Just make money, 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 make money. And when people say, "Okay, but you have enough money," we have a whole class of people who not only make more money than they will ever need in their life, but a whole class of people in a country that we now know 49% of people don't make ends meet. The true cost of economic stability, 49% of our countrymen don't make that line. And we have a whole class on the other side, the other half, who can't be brought to believe it. And we've heard these phrases, real words said by real human beings in this country. Even people elected to political office who have said things like, okay, as if anybody in this country dies of hunger. Does anybody in America die of hunger? Do you remember that? You can Google it. It got said. Does anybody in America actually die of hunger? What? Are you kidding me? Are you not paying attention? You work in the government, dude. Yeah, but nobody they know. We live in a system where Americans, if they don't have to think about it, they don't. That is the spiritual crisis. We must learn to feel. And in order to feel, strangely enough, it becomes a choice. We choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. We choose to, every day of my life, I look and say, I have every reason to think I don't have the money, the context, the influence, or the talent or skill to prevent people from dying of hunger in this country. But there's somebody near me who does. And just talking about it could open a door. And so that is why I'm going to choose to do it. Even if it seems impossible, because I can't do it myself. I remind myself that I didn't do this to do it by myself. I did it to convince myself and others that we need to choose every day to do it. Not because it is easy, but because it is hard. And because we are conscious beings. I wrote a blog post I didn't post a couple of weeks ago. I was kind of angry. I said, I'm going to sit on this before I post it. Where I talked real briefly about, I don't know how many of you saw my interview with LJ Sowerman on the podcast. He's a young Mormon returned missionary who's studying theology at BYU. And when I contacted him, I said, I'd like to have you on my show. I know it sounds weird, but I care about what you said. And I was just hate watching his program on YouTube. I forget what it's called now. It's like Rational Theology or something like that. I forget what it's called. About his studying theology at BYU. I'm like, oh, great. And we'll talk about a department that doesn't need to exist. Just kidding. That's a joke. Because I was watching one of his first episode, and one of these Mormon kids at BYU that he was interviewing asked him, why did you do this? Why did you become interested in theology of all things? And he said, oh, I've always been interested in philosophy and so forth. I'm like, cool. But then he talked about his mission in Eastern Europe that he just came home from like a year ago. I mean, this kid's, he's young. He's young. And he said, I had this moment. I went out on my mission and I had a really good mission, and I had a really good mission president. I had every reason to be happy on my mission. And I wasn't. Suddenly my ears perked up. Anybody who knows the Cora Horror Argument, my book, my first and only book so far, knows that's kind of my story. And it's a story I know more and more, the more people I know who serve missions for the Mormon Church. And I listened, and he starts talking about his experience on his mission and how guilty he felt because he was depressed. And I said, yes. This young Mormon kid is talking about, he's talking about the thing I've been talking about for 25 years now. And he starts talking about, and I realized how many people around me, how many other missionaries are going through the same thing. I went, holy shit, I misjudged this kid entirely. And he started to go over how the church had developed a system to help missionaries check in regularly and train missionaries to check in with themselves, a process of checking in with themselves. And now this was new. I went, whoa, wait a minute. What's this? The Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is doing this. He says, and they taught us to check in with ourselves regularly and to decide when the time was that we were depressed enough, or that we couldn't handle things emotionally on our own, and that we owed it to the mission, we owed it to the church, we owed it to our families, we owed it to the Lord to notify somebody, and then how to notify who to notify and what to notify them of, so that we could get help. And I went, "Oh my gosh. What? What? The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is developing a system, has developed a system where missionaries can advise somebody that they're thinking about hurting themselves or harming themselves in some way, and the church intervenes and gets them resources to help them through that crisis. This is a thing that the Mormon Church is doing. If the church is doing this, I need to know, because it changes everything I say about them." And so I said, "I would like to ask you, please, to come on my show and talk to me about it." And we had a great conversation in which I discovered the church is not doing nearly as much as I had been led to believe in that moment, but they are doing apparently something. And I said, "For that, I commend them, and I commend you for learning this." And so at the end of that, and this whole interaction with this young man was he's a very nice kid, LJ Sowerman, or Luke. And my whole interaction with him was very positive, has been very positive. And I said, "Well, we've run out of time. That's our show. Is there anything you'd like to say?" And he said, "Can I ask you about the Church of Korihor?" I said, "Oh, sure." And suddenly occurred to me, "Oh yeah, that's the thing I do. I don't just talk about Mormons. I talk about us, the Korihors." I'm like, "Sure. What do you want to know about us?" And he said, "What is the basis of your whole theology?" It was words to that effect, of the whole philosophy of what gives meaning to your life as an atheist. And I said, "That's good. That's a good question. To be honest with you, Luke," I said, "I think it's death." And he was a little surprised. I said, "No, it sounds depressing when just stated like that, but it's not for me. My mission, my depression on my mission made me become keenly aware of how close I am every day to choosing to not live in this world anymore and not care if it meant that I went to hell. I lived on that line every day for most of my mission. And it convinced me more than anything else in my life that there was no God. And that if something about my life was going to be worthwhile, it had to come from inside me, and that it was a crutch, and a dangerous crutch, for me to expect that meaning or purpose to come from outside me, whether that's from God or from society, from my country or from my family, or from duty and obligation to other human beings. That as soon as you make it about the others, even if it seems totally virtuous and good to care, well, because my children need me, because my spouse needs me, because my parents need me, to be grateful to my parents, to be grateful to my country, to be grateful to my people, to carry a legacy, or whatever reason, that becomes a thing that somebody can kick out from underneath you, like God, and suddenly leave you without a reason to carry on every day. And you don't need to add that kind of pressure onto yourself in a world where, if you lived every day in this life comfortable and happy and joyous and good and virtuous and moral, you will still die. We'll never beat death. And that's not a terrible thing. It's a good thing, because eventually you'd run out of energy to put up with this world and the suffering that it brings you. So one of the greatest things, I know people think I'm depressed when I say it, but one of the greatest things I know about this life is that it ends. Not just because sometimes I look forward to death, which sometimes I do, which is usually when I am depressed, but because when my life feels like I am experiencing joy and meaning and purpose of some kind, it is that moment in which I think, if this thing I did this day, even if it is a small thing, was the only good thing I did in this world before I left it, in my own mind and in my own heart, it was worth the rest. If I could live like that every day, I might actually achieve a state of being where it's not that I don't get sad. I get sad, but where I never again have to think, was all the meaning in my life just a lie sold to me by a corporation to try and tap me for money or obedience or sex or whatever else the church wants from me. I said, ironically enough, and I've said this to people before, I said, ironically enough, that the purity of that intention that I derive from the constant acknowledgement that I will die and that so will you, so will everyone at some point, and that we have this one opportunity to choose to do something that makes you yourself feel within yourself with absolutely no other reason outside, to know that purpose within. That if the Church of Korihor is the one entity in the world, and maybe it isn't the only one, but if it were one that never grew to be a multi-billion dollar corporation, never grew to have massive buildings or airplanes or whatever else churches have now, but for a small handful of people, gave them that purpose every day and that reminder, you will die one day. Do something right now that made every ounce of suffering you went through, all the illness in your family or in yourself, all of the effects of poverty and misfortune, all of the setbacks in your career or in your education, the loss of faith, the existential crisis, mental illness, emotional crisis, divorce, estrangement. You take all of that, and rather than choosing to not feel it at all, choose one thing you did today, you're going to do today. Even if it's just sit here in this moment and don't go to a cabinet where there's a gun. Don't go to the car in the garage. Don't go to that freeway overpass. Just sit here and dare yourself to feel it, so that tomorrow you can get out there and do something. That if you could look at your whole life from a bird's eye view and say, that moment, that right there, that moment right there made the rest of it worthwhile to me. Whether or not it meant something to anybody else doesn't even fucking matter. Yeah, I'm the only one I have to impress. Fills me more with purpose than God ever did. If there's a message worth crying from the rooftops, that's the one for me. In comparison to that one thing, I think everything that Jesus of Nazareth taught for me is petty by comparison. I don't think that Siddhartha learned anything nearly as profound as that. That may be pretentious, probably is. But I've done a lot of reading. And this one thing that I picked up more from Albert Camus and from Arthur Schopenhauer and from Alain de Botton, Britt Hartley, and Joe Rawlins, I am convinced is so far beyond the wisdom of every religious movement in the history of the world that it's a pity to me to think that there would be institutions that teach people anything, and there isn't at least one that taught this. Amen. You guys know I love you, face. I'm glad that we got a chance to do this, even though it was a little later in the day. Oh, it's very late in the day. I didn't realize I'd gone for 3 hours. I want to leave you with a little message to keep you going every day. And then we're going to meet again on Wednesday. I'm going to do my snarky thing that keeps us entertained, keeps me entertained. And don't forget to flash bright. News coming on the horizon, by the way, about the Korahor app. It's gonna be exciting. I'm excited. We'll not do Underground or Miami Heat, although that one's so funny. Let's do a new one. I'm feeling this one. My brother is cold. Don't forget, flash bright.
My brother is cold. Then how can I rest? I go to find those the gods haven't blessed. My sister is hungry. She's no less than me. While she has not eaten, nobody is free. I am not warm while my brother is cold. I am never free where my neighbor is sold. I am still hungry till my sister is fed. My brother is cold, but I am not dead.
My family is here, wherever they're from. Each someone's child in need of someone
needs to spare until all are home. We all have to share. My sister won't starve while there is bread. We are not done till we are all fed.